Asante sana.
Ochanda.
I thought Dina Mwamba Nesia. Junior was completely wrong about the interpretation. He was
Our chief is chief.
Commissioner Ratti. Commissioner Ratti. Haya sister, twende kazi. Long as your face. Oh, I've shown my face. I cannot see.
I think it will take about.
What I do, I can read. I can read first,
yes.
then go.
Yes, you can read.
Yes. That's the best thing. Now read them.
How many pages?
You can read them.
It should just be the two of you to read.
No. Watch it. So
Kenyans voted in the 6th election since the return to multi-party politics in 1992, the political reform we call the Second Liberation. As is customary, voting went very smoothly. But when it came to tallying and transmission of results, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. It became the first presidential election in Africa to be annulled by the court, and only the 4th in the entire world. In the aftermath, the annulment has plunged the country into uncharted waters. That was to be expected. What we could not have expected is that the country's leadership would be divided by a fundamental tenet of democracy, namely free and fair elections. We at NASA have insisted that the fresh election ordered be held to the standard ordered by the Supreme Court, that is, in strict conformity with the Constitution and written law. We have provided a checklist of what we deem to be the reducible minimum changes required to ensure compliance. The validity of the checklist of the requirement for free and fair elections proposed by NASA has not been disputed by anyone, not by the IEBC, not by Jubilee, or other actors and observers. The EU Observer Mission recommendations are in conformity with our irreducible minimum. Remember the 18-point statement issued by the EU mission here. Instead, the case for proceeding with the fresh election on 26th of October, without these changes being made on the grounds of time constraints, is unacceptable. Jubilee and the other proponents of an election without reforms are saying, Bora uchaguzi, that is, any election will do. But we in NASA are calling for uchaguzi bora, a credible election. In a constitutional democracy, we should not be debating about a free and fair election or compliance with court orders, or accountability for breach of public trust. We should have been working together to ensure that we uphold these values, as they are not only our national values, but are also the foundations of a credible electoral system. Instead, the IEBC has stonewalled meaningful deliberations on the necessary reforms to ensure that the elections of 26th of October are free and fair. It has wasted valuable time engaging in public relations exercises intended to create the illusion of motion without any movement. We have come to the conclusion that there is no intention on the part of the IEBC to undertake any changes to its operations and personnel to ensure that the illegalities and irregularities that led to the invalidation of the 8th August 2017 do not happen again. All indications are that the election scheduled for 26th of October will be worse than the previous one. On its part, the Jubilee administration's proposed amendment to the election laws demonstrates that it has no intention of competition on a level playing field. The only election Jubilee administration is interested in is one that it must win, even unlawfully. Both Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto have gloated that they have numbers in parliament to amend even the constitution. The Jubilee vice chairman is on record stating that Kenya requires a benevolent dictator, and proceeded to exhort Uhuru Kenyatta to exercise dictatorial powers. These utterances provide the motive for the blatant across-the-board rigging of the August 8th elections to secure the majorities that Jubilee needs to overrun our constitution. Kenyatta and Ruto are beneficiaries, believers and defenders of the old order. They intend to overthrow our new constitutional order and reinstall the old order. The over 300 elections petitions filed so far, majority against Jubilee, are evidence enough that this claimed majority is fraudulent. We wish to reiterate what we have stated in the past, that we will not allow autocracy back into Kenya. It is unfortunate that international actors who have supported Kenyans in their quest for democracy and good governance are now on the side of appeasing dictatorship in the mistaken belief that it will maintain stability. We shall not allow anything to dampen our morale. We want the battle for multi-party democracy. We want the battle for a new constitution. We are going to win the battle for a free and fair election. After deliberating on our position in respect of the upcoming election, considering the interests of the people of Kenya, the region and the world at large, we believe that all will be best served by NASA vacating its presidential candidature in the election scheduled for 26th October this 2017. My colleague, my running mate, Honorable Kalonzo Musyoka, will take over from here.
Yeah, start with 14.
Based our decision.
Okay. We have based our decision on the foregoing and the following constitutional and legal basis. Under the heading Supreme Court Decision in the Election Petition number 1 of 2017, Raila Odinga versus IBC and others, in a his decision to nullify the presidential election held on August 8, 2017, the Supreme Court made the following findings of illegalities and irregularities based on which the National Super Alliance Coalition proposed a 12-point irreducible minimum required to make the fresh election fully compliant with the Supreme Court decision. With regard to the statutory reforms, on the matter of the statutory reforms used in the elections, the court found that contrary to the assertion by the Commission that it had fully complied with the Constitution and the law, and the position taken by the Commission through the affidavit of Immaculate Kasait, that the Commission had developed standards for its electoral goods prior to their procurement, including specific security features for each ballot paper and statutory reform in order to prevent duplication, misuse, piracy, fraud, counterfeiting, and to improve controls, and that the statutory reforms and ballot papers are the features which included Gulyosha patterns, anti-copy patterns, watermarks, microtext, tapered serialization, invisible UV printing, polling station data personalization, self-carbonating element and barcodes, different color for each ballot paper, and that the forms were in a standard form or format. The scrutiny supervised by the Registrar of Supreme Court and authenticated by the agents of all the parties to the case had reviewed the following. A, the Commission declared Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta the President-elect before it received the results from 11,883 polling stations and from 17 constituencies. B. Form 34C, used to declare Uhuru Kenyatta president-elect, was not original but a photocopy, and that no explanation was given as to the whereabouts of the original form, and that the form, as crucial as it is, bore neither watermark nor a serial number. C. Forms 34B, used to declare Uhuru Kenyatta president-elect, were of dubious authenticity, and that some of the forms were photocopies, carbon copies, or were not signed by the returning officers. Out of the 291 forms 34B, 56 did not have watermark features, 31 did not bear serial numbers, 5 were not signed at all, were not in a standard form or format, among other discrepancies. D. Out of a random sample of 4,299 forms 34As examined, a total of 189 forms are not been filled in the handover quote section. 287 forms are not been filled in the takeover section. 481 forms were carbon copies. 11 forms had no watermark, and that considering the sample size, it is apparent that the discrepancies were widespread. E. The forms were not in a standard form or format. The Supreme Court ended its examination of this part of the judgment by raising the following question, and I quote from their own ruling: who introduced these forms into the system? End of quote. On application and technology, I think that's it. I think my brother will take from there. Okay. Moses, you deal with application and technology.
Application of technology. On the matter of application of technology, the Supreme Court found and held that A. The Commission failed to electronically transmit the statutory forms 34As and 34Bs as required by Section 39(1)(c) of the Elections Act. The Court accepted the petitioner's claims that the Commission's IT system was infiltrated and compromised, and the data therein interfered with, or IEBC officials themselves interfered with the data, or simply refused to accept that it had bungled the whole transmission system and were unable to verify the data. This being the only logical reason, the interlocutory orders for audit and access thereto were frustrated by the Commission. C. While among the 11,000 polling stations the Commission claimed were off the 3G and 4G ranges, were in Bomet, Bungoma, Busia, Homa Bay, Kajiado, Kericho, Kiambu, Kisumu, Kisii, Kirinyaga, Nyeri, Siaya, and Vihiga counties. Most parts of these counties have fairly good road network and infrastructure that it would take a short time for the presiding officers to travel to vantage points from where they would electronically transmit the results. D. The Commission had known the areas where network is weak or totally lacking beforehand and should have made provision for alternative transmission. In one of its press briefings before the elections, the Commission had assured the country that it had carefully considered every conceivable eventuality regarding the issue of electronic transmission of the presidential election results and categorically stated that the technology was not going to fail. The Commission had engaged 3 internet service providers to deal with any network challenges. E. The Commission had conscientiously disobeyed the order of scrutiny, which was a golden opportunity for the Commission to place before court evidence to debunk the petitioner's claims of hacking. By denying access to 2 critical areas of their servers, its logs which would have proved or disproved the petitioner's claim of hacking into the system and altering the presidential election results, and its servers with forms 34As and 34Bs electronically transmitted from polling stations and constituent tallying centers. F. If the Commission had nothing to hide, even before the order was made, it would have itself readily provided access to its ICT logs and servers to disprove the petitioner's claims. And you may recall the IEBC lawyer, Paul Mwite, had readily agreed to our request until Uhuru's lawyers objected. These blatant illegalities and irregularities were not without motive. It's inconceivable that an election body would falsify 80 out of 290 constituency tallies, that is 27.5%, for the sake of it. The meaning of the Supreme Court decision is that the so-called numbers claimed by Uhuru Kenyatta are fraudulent. The election was not shambolic, it was rigged for Uhuru Kenyatta. Uhuru Kenyatta lost the election. It stands to reason that we won it. The IEBC has refused, neglected, or failed to put in place mechanisms to correct these illegalities and irregularities. We deem that the fresh election ordered by the Supreme Court cannot therefore be held, allowing the candidature of Raila Amolo Odinga and Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka to lend credence to the election now scheduled is to participate in an illegality. Now, Musalia.
Thank you. I take up on the position of bad faith on the IEBC. For over 5 weeks, the Commission has engaged us in a ping-pong game, well knowing that they had no intention to streamline the electoral system to accord with the Constitution and electoral laws. 2, it is now clear that the same criminal enterprise that perpetuated the fraud in the August election is firmly in charge of the Commission and setting up even more lethal mechanisms to defraud the Kenyan voter. The conservative wing of the IBC have now firmly crystallized their stranglehold of the operations of the Commission, with every decision of the chairman being countermanded and with the proposed amendments to the electoral laws to dilute the powers, authority, and standing of the chairperson of the Commission as the returning officer of the presidential elections. 4, this is coupled with the retention of the same service providers that were complicit in the worst electoral fraud ever witnessed in modern times, including Saffron, OT Mofo, and Al Ghurair, etc. 5, the Commission CEO, who was the coup plotter in chief, and his litany of senior secretariat staff continue to dominate the operations of the Commission and stifle any attempt to initiate reforms at the Commission. It is now evident that Jubilee is firmly in charge of IEBC through 4 commissioners who have set out to implement the Jubilee agenda within the Commission. Let me say something about the Jubilee administration. 1, the ill-conceived amendments to election laws are not only unconstitutional, but go against international best practice, that in the middle of an elections contest, one cannot change the rules and put in place rules that seek to favor him. Moreover, these profound changes to the electoral architecture are being pushed through without the broad consultations as required by the Constitution. Furthermore, it is clear that the amendments are intended to legalize and regularize the illegalities that led to the invalidation of the August 8th election. It stands to reason that the motive of these elections is to use the same tactics to rig the scheduled election. The state has, in the period intervening the nullification of the August 8th presidential election, gazettement of fresh and pending of the 26th October elections, withdrawn security to the NASA presidential and deputy presidential candidate. This has made it untenable for the candidates to campaign freely without fear of being harmed. The state has done this well aware that under Article 138(8), subsection B, a presidential election would be cancelled if a presidential candidate or his deputy dies. Let me come to the position of vacating the election. as the only route to a free and fair and credible election. The IEBC published the Gazette notice declaring the fresh dates for the presidential elections with Right Honorable Raila Odinga and Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, based on the Supreme Court decision of 2013, on a question brought for direction by Attorney General, who is a Chief Government Legal Advisor. In paragraph 289 and 290, the Supreme Court found as follows. I start with 289. It is clear that a fresh election under Article 140, subsection 3, is triggered by the invalidation of the election of the declared President-elect by the Supreme Court, following a successful petition against such an election. Since such a fresh election is built on the foundations of the invalidated election, it can, in our opinion, only involve candidates who participated in the original election. In that case, there will be no basis for a fresh nomination of candidates for the resultant electoral contest. 290 now. Suppose, however, that the candidates or a candidate who took part in the original election dies or abandons the electoral quest before the scheduled date. Then the provisions of Article 138(1), subsection B, would become applicable, and with fresh nominations ensuing. As per a correction issued on 6th May 2013, the Supreme Court clarified that the relevant article is above is 138(8), subsection B, which deals with the cancellation of a presidential election in the event of the death of the president or the deputy or before the scheduled date. On or before the scheduled date. The Supreme Court finding expanded this clause to include when a candidate withdraws from the presidential election. The implication of this provision is that upon our candidate's withdrawal, the election scheduled for the 26th October stands cancelled. Our withdrawal from the election requires the IEBC to cancel the election and conduct fresh nominations. The procedure for nomination of presidential candidates is provided for in the Elections Act 2011, Section 13, subsection 1, which states, a political party shall nominate its candidates for an election under this Act at least 90 days before a general election, under this Act in accordance with its constitution rules. It is clear that this provision gives adequate time to undertake the reforms necessary to conduct an election that is in strict conformity with the Constitution, the relevant laws, and the Constitution. This being the case, it is our conviction that the withdrawal of our candidates is in the best interest of the country and a win-win for everyone. I now pass back to the Right Honourable.
This is just to show you that we have formally written a letter to the chairman of the Independent Election and Boundaries Commission, Mr. Fuller Chebukati. The letter reads, Dear Sir, withdrawal of candidature in the fresh presidential election. The above matter refers, following the nullification of the presidential election held on the 8th August 2017 and the subsequent gazettement by the Commission of the undersigned as presidential candidate and running mate for a fresh election that you have scheduled for 26th October 2017, we hereby withdraw our candidature with immediate effect. Yours faithfully, signed Honorable Raila Odinga, Honorable Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka. Received and stamped and received by the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission on the 10th of October.
So Dennis will distribute the statement.
Yes. The PG and the people of Kenya is meeting at Uhuru Park tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning. Announce it. Tomorrow, all over the country, from Mandera to Vanga, from Busia to Lamu, there are going to be demonstrations that we had earlier scheduled. So tomorrow we expect and we have organized demonstrations all across the country. And the basis of those demonstrations is under the call, no reform, no elections. No reform, no elections. And tomorrow, before we begin our demonstrations, we are going to have a gathering, a huge gathering, a public meeting at Uhuru Park. The PG is going to have a meeting at Uhuru Park with the people of Kenya, and they will read through these resolutions and then march into, from Uhuru Park we'll go into Haile Selassie, to Moi Avenue, back into Kenyatta Avenue, and then to Uhuru Park, and then we come back now to go to Anniversary Towers. No reform, no elections. No reform, no elections. Meet you there tomorrow.
Noma ni noma.
Ni noma.
Na Mungu ni yule yule.